Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to talk about the Kanasatake Resistance, which is also known as the Oka Crisis. This is a story that not enough people are familiar with, and really we should be celebrating because it's one of the stories of incredible heroism and badassery that's out there. It is an amazing story of resistance to injustice. So let's discuss. If you're not familiar with this story, what happened is the Mohawk people in Quebec originally had about 650 square kilometers. But over time, the government kept chopping pieces off of that and giving it away to other people. And so they'd give it away in dribs and drabs and little chunks here and there. And eventually, the Mohawk people were reduced down to about 6 square kilometers. So a reduction of about 100-fold in their land holdings. This is, of course, a tremendous loss, and one that was felt quite profoundly because people went from having sprawling areas of land down to this little tiny space. So this is sort of the backdrop of the tensions here, but it goes a little further because a golf course was approved to build, and they were approved for 9 holes, I think it was, and this was right next to, like, a sort of errant golf ball away from ancestral burial grounds. You know, this is sort of sacred land. This is land that, it's important. And so this was obviously a bit of an escalation in tensions. People were not happy with that for fairly obvious reasons. If you think about how people would react to building a golf course next to a cemetery, especially a cemetery for honored dead, it really did not, it didn't go over well. And it went over even less well when this golf course, the Pines, applied for and got permission to expand. And of course, guess where they wanted to expand? If you said right over the burial grounds, right over the ancestral graves, that's exactly where they wanted to put it. So they get this approval to build a golf course literally over sacred graves. This might, in another world, be the sort of backstop to a cheesy horror movie, but in this case, it was a horrible affront to people who'd already suffered a lot in terms of what the government had taken away and approved being done to them. So, this is the moment when they say, you know what, we're not doing it. And they reacted in ways that might otherwise, might normally go down in history in terms of things like the famous statement of nuts in response to a surrender demand, or the statement of Russian warship, go fuck yourself. That's basically the reaction that the Mohawk had, and they went out to set up blockades and to set up and basically to fight back. So at this point, the police rolled out, and they see that the Mohawk are sort of acting up, and they decide that they are going to shut this down. And so they start trying to shut this down with smoke, tear gas grenades, and so forth. And this does not go well because the Mohawk were armed. And so they fight back. Somebody fires a shot that ends up killing a police officer. So at this point, things have just gotten real. And the police sort of back up. They call in the RCMP, and then they also call in the Canadian forces. And they end up deploying about 4,000 soldiers to the area. Now, for context, they send about 5,000 soldiers, like Canadian soldiers, to the Gulf War. So this was a big deal. They also apparently used up every scrap of barbed wire that was in the Canadian stockpile. Every inch of barbed wire was deployed for just this small group of Mohawk warriors. So when people say that you can't really stand up against a government and have a meaningful effect, well, you can if you're as hard as the Mohawk, because they certainly did. Now, there was tension, there was a lot of a standoff, and eventually there was a sort of negotiated wind down. And as a result of these negotiations, the federal government buys this land that was going to be expanded on. They buy this up, and they say, okay, we are going to preserve this for the Mohawk people. But what they didn't do is they didn't actually set this up as a reserve, for the Mohawk, or they didn't ever transfer the land. Instead, they've just held it as federal government land, perhaps so that when tensions die down, or maybe when they've implemented more gun control and disarmed the people, maybe then they can build their golf course. Yeah. This is one of these moments that I think is tremendously heroic. It was incredibly controversial at the time, and I can say that this stand that I'm taking here in terms of saying that this was a heroic stand up for their land and to retain this is probably not going to make me any friends in Quebec, which is where this went down. In fact, I'm probably not electable, but I wasn't before anyway, so we'll live with that. This is one of those places where, it shows that sometimes you can stand up for what is right, even in the face of a government that would much rather just take the land and have it made into a golf course. They get more tax revenue out of that golf course. They get all of those things. I think it's important to remember these moments, both because it shows sort of the abuse that has gone on to many groups, including the Mohawk in this case, and also it sets the stage for how Canada has really evolved in terms of looking at some of these land claims, and that's because this was the start of that issue. People really don't want to have another round of this, but I think this is also worth noting just in terms of we often celebrate civil unrest that was for a good cause. And this, I think, is an example of that. It's an example of the little guy standing up against the government, standing up against the entire military in order to achieve something that was just. I'm also just going to note here that I think that the continued injustice is that the federal government has never actually transferred this land that I'm aware of. So a Runkletarian government, which I already mentioned, I'm not electable. So we can put aside the notion that this will actually happen. But a Runkletarian government would give them the land. And so if you ever get a chance, if you are ever on a microphone at one of these events with your sort of prime ministerial candidate, ask them if they can give the Mohawk their land. Just make that a question. Try to see if we can get this as a question in the debates, because I think that this is an ongoing injustice that should be cured. There's a few others that are sort of in my mind as things that should be dealt with, but this is one of them. They should get their land. They fought for it. It's theirs. Give it to them. That's about it. So I wanted to share this story, and I hope you guys found this to be interesting, and I hope you've learned a little bit more about it. I can't properly cover it here. There's a whole lot more to it. I guess one of the big things that I left out here is that in the course of the wind down, the military ended up bayoneting a young girl. She's now a leader and very accomplished, but at the time she was, I think it was 13 or 14, and she was trying to carry her 4-year-old sister out of sort of the danger area off to safety, and she got bayoneted. That's kind of a big deal, right? So these aren't really my stories to tell, but I still think it's important that we tell them and that we're aware of what all of this is about, because if we find ourselves forgetting, then I think that's a problem, especially because more and more I see the people who claim to be in support of Indigenous rights forgetting that some of the ways that people were able to keep their land and their rights was by fighting back, and they want to make that impossible in future. I don't think that's a good thing. So anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think. As I said, I would not be surprised if there's a bit of controversy on this one. I won't be surprised if some of you, hit whichever buttons. I'd like to encourage you to hit the like buttons, the subscribe buttons, and the share buttons, but I understand if people take issue with this. It is still controversial, even though this was in 1990. So thank you as well to my Patreon supporters at the $50 level: Traveling Science Man, CCFR, CAIM, Canada's National Firearms Association, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Jane Babin Luxor. And at the $20 level, Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Kyle Fox, Here's a Coin, Legal Witcher, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Vicky, and Dorky Dane. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.